Well, happy lunchtime, everybody. We're here with food writer David Clarey. He's been with us for, I guess, what, going on close to 2 years at this point, David?
Yep,
That's
coming up
right.
on 2 years. Yeah.
Going on close for 2 years. We're going to sit here where I think we picked an appropriate time to have this right at lunchtime to, obviously, give you a little bit of food news, food trends, also how's life after the pandemic in restaurants around Columbia. That's David's job. It's his 9 to 5. And so we're having him to do that. I think this is a great time to discuss this because things are really very much opening back up for anyone who's gone out to eat. Sometimes it's hard at the busier times to find a table. I think everyone is a little pent up. But first, before we begin anything else, let us introduce David to you. So David, tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, and more importantly, some of your favorite places to eat.
Yeah. So I grew up in the Midwest in South Dakota, a tiny, tiny town there. But from there, I went to college at the University of Minnesota, studied journalism. I worked there for about 2 years in the metro area for kind of smaller papers covering things like school board and city hall. But I grew up in a restaurant family. I knew I wanted to cover food. And I found the job here, love the city, and started here, coming up on 2 years. I think in November will be year two. So about a year and a half, a bit over that at this point.
And
Um,
what are some of those places you like to eat at?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of the Warmouth over in Cottontown. I think it's a great vibe in terms of its atmosphere. Plus, you can go there, get a good cocktail, a good small plate, or you can go there and just kind of go all out and get dinner, just tons of food. It kind of fits the occasion, and it's also, to me, feels very Columbia. More so than a lot of places I've been to that are kind of in the upscale-ish range. It really does try to be a Columbia restaurant, I think. And I think that's really, really cool. But outside of that, there's all sorts of places. I like grabbing cocktails quite a bit. So, places like Bourbon, Black Rooster, the New Hampton Street Vineyard does a pretty good job with its bar program, despite being a wine restaurant. And so places like that. But there's all sorts of places. It'd be hard for me to kind of narrow it down specifically.
All right, well, that's it. We're ending the chat right now because I want to go get something to eat and something to drink at this point. I don't know about you. Actually, in all seriousness, a couple of real quick notes. Hey, we're taking questions during this. There's a little Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen. Please submit some questions. We'll try to answer some of them at the end. David has put in his email address, his Twitter handle, his IG handle. I also think he put a PIN code in for his bank account as well in the chat area. So please feel free to follow him on social media. Also to send him questions in case we don't answer your questions, or you have one a little bit later. Also a reminder for everyone who signed up for this, we're going to send you a link to the video of this. Somebody didn't turn off his phone. We're going to send a link from this video, as well as we're going to post it on YouTube. So if you have some friends who missed this, who didn't sign up for it, but obviously want to see it, it'll be on YouTube there a little bit later, usually about 24 hours after we're done this. So let's jump right into some questions, David, that I have for you before we get into some questions from our readers and viewers and such. One of the things I was thinking is this is sort of the first time you and I are chatting since obviously things have reopened since COVID. For those who maybe haven't tried to go out to restaurants to dine in instead of doing the takeout routine, what is it like? And are they going to run into a lot of rules, a lot of restrictions?
Yeah. I think the first thing that we're seeing right now, and you already mentioned it, is just how busy restaurants are right now. I've been talking with chefs and owners of various restaurants for the last few months. And ever since kind of we've seen the vaccinations start to, the rate go up and the restrictions go away, they've been going nuts. The owner of Terra told me recently that I believe April was one of his top months ever in the history of his restaurant. So we are seeing a lot of restaurants just really, really do well at the moment. And I think that's just kind of pent up demand of folks not being able to go out. But in terms of the rules and regulations that you're referring to there, for the most part, we're not seeing a ton of that anymore. A lot of places are having signs up that say, masks are no longer required here, but they're still highly encouraged. How that translates in terms of the customer actually doing it really does come on a personal level. I think if you go out to eat most anywhere, you'll see some folks still wearing a mask, but by and large, for the most part, you won't see it too much. What you still will probably see a little bit of, though, is reduced capacity in the dining room. And I'm not sure how much that's going to change either. I think a lot of places are far beyond the 50% or even 70%. I don't know if they'll ever get back to that 100% figure they ever were at in the past. I've talked with some owners who just feel that after they reduce their capacity and then kind of experience working in that environment, they found that it actually fit their team and kind of their service better, and it allowed them to operate better. And so I'm not sure if we will see a pure 100% come back. But really, it's kind of largely what folks would remember it of being if they haven't been out, before the pandemic. It's very similar. There's a few other small things, like menus that you can get from QR codes that some restaurants are holding on to. But again, it's, by and large, it's gone back to a pretty similar fashion to what it used to be.
Actually, real quick, let me ask you this. Do you think restaurants will keep some of these pandemic methods that they use, like QR codes for restaurants? Obviously, it saves a little bit on wear and tear, and obviously saying, oh, where's my menu? Well, no, your menu is right there on the napkin holder. Just hit the QR code and you can sit there as soon as you sit down. Can you see some of those things maybe sticking around?
Yeah, I think so. I think it really depends too on kind of the dining level, so to speak, that you're looking at. If we're talking fine dining, I don't know if you'll see the QR code style thing stick around because that's so reliant on kind of the experience of the server diner relationship. But once you get more into casual dining, fast casual dining, fast food, and those levels, I definitely think we're going to see it because it kind of fits the model of a more casual atmosphere already, and folks are comfortable doing it at this point. It's very easy. So I think things like the QR code menu definitely will be kind of more of a permanent mainstay. And we were seeing things, in the fast food realm kind of trend that way even before the pandemic at chain restaurants like McDonald's and stuff, having the kiosk order menus. So these are things that have been kind of trending in a way on like a national scale. Whether we see like a kiosk at an independent restaurant, I think that's unlikely. But, I think we do have a customer base that's more and more familiar, operating with things on a digital scale.
And also, I would think that to a certain degree, we've gotten used to things being a little different, so that if
Yeah.
you wanted to try something, whereas before that may have been a risk, but obviously, sort of all bets are off in a way.
Right.
Uh, that said, how did generally in Colombia restaurants fare? Did we see a lot of closures? Are we maybe even seeing some opportunities where people are opening some places?
Yeah. I mean, during the pandemic, it was really, really difficult. I've written about it a ton, and it's been a big conversation, just kind of in the national conversation, and just how the industry was hit hard. I do think Columbia restaurants, to a degree, were slightly, and I want to emphasize slightly, insulated, where they didn't get hit as hard as some of the worst horror stories, so to speak, as what you would hear. But I mean, talking with owners, we're still talking that sales were down, 50% or more from the year prior. But in terms of the closures, we luckily didn't see too many. And talking with owners, a lot of that has to do with some of those federal programs like the PPP, that's the Paycheck Protection Program. And it was really maligned in the first round of payments for a lot of, I think, pretty valid reasons. But they kind of tweaked it and kind of figured it out over time, where by the time the second round came out, it seemed like it helped out a lot of folks. And I've had several owners tell me, that if that money hadn't been out there, they don't think they'd still be around right now. And there's been other smaller programs on the local and state level, and other, federal programs as well that have come out since then that have really helped buoy the industry. And so it's been difficult, but, they've luckily managed to stick around. But there were a few notable closures too, like you mentioned, asking me if that was the case. Most notably, I think, is Yesterday's in Five Points. That closed, and so did Uncle Louie's, kind of a beloved dive bar over in the Vista, which is kind of it was an interesting spot there, with the Vista being kind of a hub of development, but it also had a spot like Uncle Louie's, which is a bit more of a throwback, I think, to kind of like the identity of Columbia that people think about. And both of them, when I talked with them, kind of cited the uncertainty with COVID-19. The owners of Yesterday's were also kind of, they were nearing retirement age, and they certainly weren't going to call it quits, in the next few years. But, talking with them, there was a lot of, do we want to keep kind of going through with this, at this stage of our careers? But I think those are the two biggest names we saw close. A few chain spots around town closed as well, but in terms of independence, Yesterday's and Uncle Louie's definitely come to mind.
So, I mean, anything new coming along? Anything, maybe some changes coming along to existing places? Just obviously, when you come out of this, some people might say, "Hey, I didn't realize that somebody had opened a place over there," or maybe a place that wasn't, maybe doing something a little differently. Any notables there that you'd mention?
Yeah, we actually saw quite a few spots open up during the pandemic. I think kind of a surprising amount. Most notably, we have spots like Transmission Arcade and Bang Bag Pinball Lounge, which are two kind of in the same vein. They're mainly bars, they serve bar food, but they also feature an arcade component, which is particularly interesting when you think about it in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, just because that requires folks to come into the door, hang out, and spend a lot of time there. It's not the most to-go friendly thing. But in talking with them, it seems like they've emerged pretty well. But beyond that, we have other spots too. I mentioned them earlier. There's Hampton Street Vineyard, which was a big mainstay on Main Street and the downtown area for a long time. But a new ownership group took that over during the pandemic. And talking with a lot of folks, it's been warmly received. They've kind of kept the ethos of a wine restaurant, but they kind of I think modernized it in terms of its aesthetic and its menu a little bit as well. And then, I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, but even a spot like Lula Drake Wine Parlor, which is set to reopen this month, they're going to reopen with a new focus on their wine program and a new kitchen team. So even though it's an existing spot, I think it's going to be, you know, quite a bit different from what folks might be used to just in terms of its offerings. Um, and we have other spots like Soundbites Eatery, which is a cafe coming to downtown. And our colleague Mike Fitz recently wrote about a Jack Brown's Burger chain coming up in 5 Points at the former Cover 3 spot. So yeah, we're definitely seeing spots open.
And I guess you can't blame them. There's sort of this pent up demand. For
Yeah.
anyone who's tried to get a hotel or a rental at the beach, or you've tried to book a flight, or obviously even gone shopping some weekend days, you can kind of see that the crowds are back, and boy, are they back. And
Mhm.
are you getting a sense that restaurants are crowded, are getting full, especially during obviously what is more or less their busy times?
Yeah, no, definitely. They are. I mean, just as an example, on Wednesday night, I wasn't there, but I talked with the chef of Black Rooster or it was Tuesday night, and that's not really a day you expect to see a restaurant be packed. But they had a waiting list. They were packed all night long. He said, and that's kind of been the trend for a lot of spots for a long time. And I mean, even outside, that's kind of in the upscale realm. You can go out to a brewery. There's Savage Craft Ale Works, which opened up, I believe, in January, and they have just attracted crowds since day one. Down the street is Wico Bottle and Beer Garden, a pretty popular beer garden from the owner of the Wig, and that's a similar scene. Its parking lot is frequently overflowing. And I mean, I could list off more and more spots, but we are seeing restaurants and bars just frequently be super, super busy. And go ahead.
No, 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 you're done. I was to say, well, obviously, let me just jump off of Savage Craft, because
Mhm.
you have a weekly newsletter, comes out on Wednesdays, and in your
Yeah.
newsletter, you highlighted a story that you had in Free Times this week about Savage Craft and D's Wings opening in West Columbia, and how that's impacting State Street. How is this? How is this kind of playing out a little bit? Are you going to see bottlenecks for a little while until things kind of sort out? Especially, let's first really specifically talk about what you wrote about State Street, which is of course becoming a
Mhm.
very hot spot, as you mentioned, but also to other parts of town as well.
Yeah. So looking at State Street, it's a place that's grown during the pandemic with the opening of, like I just mentioned, Savage Craft. Plus, there is, D's Wings, which was a beloved Casey spot. Just, I believe it's half a mile, three-quarters of a mile down the street that moved over there. And there was other spots too, like Palette and the Hideout Cafe, which, while they're not necessarily, the type of bigger businesses that draw crowds in terms of the size of the crowd, they've been pretty popular from what I understand. And so what that's created though is kind of a parking situation where the owners aren't necessarily seeing there are enough parking spots for everyone. Um, that it causes an issue in particular when we're looking at the number of folks that are being drawn to that area now. I talked with the president of the chamber over there, and he felt, some of this is kind of an awareness issue. There's a public parking garage, a part of the Brooklyn parking development, which isn't the most well known, and there's paid parking as well that's opened up in a former funeral home down the street. That's kind of become pay by app parking like you see in Columbia. But in talking with owners, they acknowledge that they do feel like there is an awareness issue to a degree, but they ultimately feel like they're going to trend towards having to find a way to make new parking. And what that actually looks like, though, remains to be seen. How does that come about? But what we also know is the city of West Columbia is having conversations. They've held meetings, and they plan to continue to do so with the business owners in the area on that on that issue.
Are there any other areas that are getting particularly busy, particularly crowded with because of the a growing restaurant, bar, brewery scene?
Yeah. I think all of the existing spots around town, we're talking about Five Points, downtown, the Vista. I think spots like those, while they're not necessarily seeing, like a huge infusion of new spots like, State Street is, they're also very busy, like we're saying. Or you can even look more broadly out to Northeast Columbia. And they've seen openings all the time with all the development there. There's a spot named Ratio, which is a kind of a upscale Peruvian joint. And they consistently kind of advocate for reservations for them and things like that. And so we are seeing pockets around town all be very busy, though I'm not sure we're seeing it to the degree in terms of like creating, exterior issues because of that, like we do over in West Columbia right now.
Hey, just a reminder that if you do have any questions you want to ask us, just click on that Q&A tab down at the bottom of your screen and ask us a question. We'd be happy to answer it. But let me follow up with one from that I have, which is just, what are the trends in food and beer and booze and anything else that you're noticing? I remember a little bit ago you wrote about dry rub wings being a very popular item
Yeah.
in Colombia. But what else are we seeing? What else are you noticing coming up or existing?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of the restaurants that are focusing on seasonal things, we're coming into the time of the year where, I mean, this is getting pretty nitty gritty here, but in terms of the produce, we're going to see, things like corn, basil, arugula, featured on the menu heavily. Something kind of interesting that I've been noticing also at kind of the seasonal upscale spots is just huge wreckfish has been everywhere. And I'm not too sure, what's up with that, but that's been a very popular item. In terms of drinking, I recently did a spring cocktail menu. We're starting to transition to summer, but I was perusing through a lot of them, a lot of the menus, and we're seeing those spring cocktails still linger on there. And that's looking at things like milk punches, or clarified milk punch, or a lot of rum drinks, or drinks that focus on more floral and herbaceous flavors. And they're going to be a bit heavier still as well, just because while we're not seeing it anymore, in the early part of spring, we still do catch a little bit of chilly weather. So the spring cocktails kind of straddle a bit of the transition period from, cooler temps to summer's heat. But I do think pretty soon here on the cocktail front, we're going to start seeing kind of the fruitier, sweeter leading cocktails, particularly starting on Monday. Bourbon, which is, I would say, probably the premier cocktail bar in town, is starting their super popular Tiki Week. And that's going to feature tons of kind of the types of drinks you'd expect. And so in terms of, actual on the menu, those are the kind of trends I would see. But in terms of more broader, kind of like the types of restaurants, I think it's interesting where you look at a city like Columbia, it's insulated to an extent to kind of maybe the trendier things you would see in other places. Columbia kind of has what it likes, and you frequently see growth in that. And so we're looking at kind of like casual dining in kind of like a bar setting. Kind of, I mean, we talked about D's Wings earlier, but a lot of openings you see are kind of in that realm. And so I think what you're going to see before more of those trends come is emerging from the pandemic are restaurants that are kind of, getting their feet back under them, or, new owners looking to open that kind of are going to survey the landscape and kind of weigh their options a little bit longer before we start to see kind of more of the trendier things take place here.
Well, you mentioned a couple of times that how Columbia is a little bit of a different restaurant market than maybe
Hmm.
some other places, especially of course when you're in South Carolina, you're always going to be compared to Charleston. But of course,
Hmm.
Greenville has obviously what's been seen as sort of an up and coming restaurant
Mhm.
scene as well. I know Columbia's getting there. How in your reporting and in your discussion with people looking at at things statewide, where does Columbia sit? What's its niche, say, compared to Greenville, Charleston, and of course the all-you-can-eat capital of Myrtle Beach?
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, I think you see a lot of the standout spots in Columbia when we're talking about places like Terra and Motor Supply, and you can expand that out to other spots like the Warmouth and Divino Rosso. They're all really well received. There's been a lot of kind of like regional, national food magazines that have kind of described Columbia as sort of like a hidden gem. I think for our Food and Wine festival that Free Times and Post and Courier Columbia put on, we also kind of leaned into that description as well. So you see spots like that are really, really well received, and they are doing a lot of the things you'll see at other spots. But in talking to folks, I think one of the biggest strengths of Columbia's scene is the international restaurant scene. I think it's a little unmatched in the state. We have the whole Decker International Corridor, which I mean, you could stop, anywhere along there and find a terrific meal. From a cuisine that you might not be that familiar with, and that's something I think that's really unique to Columbia and kind of makes it stand out in a statewide level.
Well, great. Well, we
Yeah.
did get a couple of questions beforehand from readers, from folks who signed up for this. And so the first question is about a fairly specific restaurant, but I think it also brings up a broader topic.
Mhm.
This is from Dan, and he wanted to know when Aladia's plans to reopen their Irmo restaurant on North Lake Drive. It apparently was closed because of lack of staff, according to a social media posting.
Mhm.
Apparently it sounds like they kept maybe the Lexington restaurant location open during this time. But
Mhm.
I was really curious, have you been able to catch up, first of all, with Aladia? We obviously had gotten a heads up on these questions beforehand, but more importantly, what are you hearing in general about the staffing crunch that maybe some of the restaurants are having out there?
Yeah. So I wasn't, in terms of Alodia specifically, able to get in touch with kind of where they're at yet before this talk. However, I was looking at that post, and it was made about a month ago, and they kind of estimated their closure to be 1 to 2 months, and they emphasized in the comments, that they will be back. So cross our fingers that that's certainly the case. But like you noted, the staffing crunch is very real right now. And we've seen that throughout the pandemic for a lot of obvious reasons. In the middle of the pandemic, folks weren't wanting to work in a position, where they were constantly having to be face to face with folks, and particularly in a lot of cases, the staffing was very slim at these spots just because they weren't open at the scale they typically are. Now, what we've seen as spots have reopened, kind of en masse, is that it's kind of a supply versus demand issue. Everywhere is hiring right now. There's not enough folks that out there, to be hired. Quite literally, we've seen this in various spots. I know various restaurants around town have closed on certain days, or they've nixed certain services such as lunch and only focused on dinner. So in terms of a struggle, like this, in terms of staffing causing an issue at a restaurant, that's unfortunately quite common in the Columbia area at the moment. And I think some folks expected it by now to get better, but I don't know if we've turned the page yet on it. A lot of people talk about it kind of as, workers have realized that the worker workplace relationship in the hospitality industry isn't the best. It's not necessarily lean towards them. And then it's a kind of, we could go down that conversation for quite a while, and there's a lot of different opinions on it. But what is clear is that it's an issue right now, and it remains to be seen kind of how it comes to a close.
Before I get to the next question, let me ask an offshoot of that. Are
Mhm.
there any supply shortages going on? Whether that again, because we hear often about the idea that a lot of shipments are delayed, or a lot of
Mhm.
there are a lot of shortages of things. Is there a shortage of any food? Is there a
Mhm.
shortage of any supplies that restaurants are running into?
Yeah, in terms of well, I'll start with the supplies, because that's a bit more sporadic. I don't know if I could point to any one specific thing right now, but in talking with owners again, we are hearing about just random things. I was talking with the owner of Saluda's in Five Points, and he was saying, I believe he had issues getting glasses, for a special party he was hosting at his restaurant or private party event. And, I think takeout containers at times have been an issue. So it can be very sporadic and very random, kind of what we're seeing on the supplies side, but definitely issues there. On the food end, chicken wings right now, it's funny you bring up kind of the dry rub wings, but the demand is huge and the supply is not there. And so we're seeing a lot of spots raise the prices temporarily. And we've been trending that way for quite a while, specifically in meat, where the prices keep going up and restaurants have tried to kind of, hold their ground, but it's getting to a point where that's no longer feasible for them to kind of, cover their margins, so to speak. And, we talked a little bit there about the labor shortage at restaurants. That's being seen on the food distribution level too. Again, I was talking with the chef at Black Rooster the other day, and he mentioned that normally the shipment's supposed to come early afternoon, late morning, but because of the labor shortage, they're a bit behind. So he's at times getting shipments at 6 p.m. in the middle of a service, and so we're seeing issues kind of rise up on the labor front on food adjacent industries as well.
Sounds good. And finally, Susan asked a number of questions. I'm going to kind of boil it down here. Number one, you mentioned like Lula Drake, but of the sort of the top-notch places, the places that people really think about are in Colombia. Are there any other places that aren't open or still yet to open quite yet? Number one, and then number two, answer if there's any chance of a restaurant coming back to Bull Street.
Right. So on your first note, again, I did mention Lula. It is returning. The plan is for this month. I've noticed on their Facebook page, they're still hiring for a handful of positions. I do know he brought back a lot of his team. So hopefully, the June reopening comes. And in terms of other notable spots, for the most part, we've seen almost every place reopen. The one holdout that I guess I could note is Bon Swan Thai Bistro over in Five Points, which is kind of, an upscale Thai restaurant that's really, really well loved in the food community. And I think by the broader Colombia community as well. And they've held out as well. They're a small family owned operation. And from what I understand, it's, two brothers and the parents who are, a bit older running it kind of on their own. And so that's kind of for them, they're playing it as safe as possible before they reopen. But from what I understand, they fully intend to reopen. I believe that question also noted bourbon, and I'll be quick on this, but bourbon has been open for a while, but what's worth noting is they recently expanded to the former Blue Flower Cafe spot next door. And it's a really cool atmosphere there and kind of contrasts with sort of the busy Western saloon vibe they have in their original spot. It's a bit more laid back. They do a tapas small plate menu instead. And I think for folks who maybe wouldn't go to bourbon due to its kind of wait times or kind of its crowdedness, it really kind of alleviates that issue for folks. Go ahead.
Yeah, as you say, in Bull Street.
Yeah.
Obviously, any word on something coming back there?
Yeah. So Bull Street is a bit of a wait and see, unfortunately. What I can say is that there are things are in the works on more restaurants there. That's some reporting coming from our colleague Mike Fitz again, a business reporter. But there's really sparse details on that. We expect to learn more in the summer, but beyond that, it's really tough to say. We've seen the REI and the Starbucks there open during the pandemic. Kind of at the start of the pandemic, we saw a Bone-In Barbecue close, or I guess that was before the pandemic. But we know there's been interest there, obviously. That Bone-In Barbecue space was looked at by the Middleton family, who own a number of Main Street businesses and restaurants. They ultimately kind of decided to wait and err on the side of caution and pass on that spot. But we know for a fact, there's been interest there, and we should know more come summer about what should be coming.
Great. Well, David, you've brought up a lot of great issues today, and you've been, I think gave a lot of great information about what's going on in the restaurant scene. I think you're doing a great job covering it, and for those who, aren't reading you regularly, they should be if they want to know what's happening in the, obviously with food, beverage, wine, and also in the industry in general. You've done a good job with that. So I want to thank you for what you do, and obviously thank you for taking the time and sitting down with us today. Also remember, you have his email address. Send him questions, send him comments, send him story ideas, send him money. I don't care. Send him everything. Again, a reminder for those of you who signed up, a link to this, a video link to this chat will be emailed to you, but it will also be available on the Post and Courier's YouTube page, likely tomorrow, if not on Monday. So you can, if you missed it and you want to catch up with it, please do. I want to also remind you that I mentioned that David has a weekly newsletter on Wednesdays on food and dining here in Columbia. Please subscribe to that. We also have newsletters on what to do in Columbia every week that comes out on Thursdays. We have twice a week business newsletters. We have a daily headline newsletter. If you want a newsletter, we got them. That's a great way to get a sense of what we're doing, what we're covering here at Post and Courier Columbia and Free Times. And also, I want to encourage you, if you really are, a fan of our work, a fan of what David does, a fan of what our staff does here in Columbia, as well as the Post and Courier in general. This is the state's largest newspaper. Please subscribe. In fact, we're running a sale, 4 months for $4. Just go online. You can't miss it. We hit you with it. It's a great deal, a great way to try us out. Also, if you happen to bump into one of the 13 journalists here in the Columbia area, we have cards with us that get you a deal that if you want to subscribe for a year, we can give it to you half off. That's $10 a month. So come find us. When David is eating or I'm in the grocery store, we'll try to sell you a subscription. That's just the way we do it. That's the way we obviously are able to keep doing the great things we're doing, including Uncovered and including our Pulitzer finalist series, Rising Waters, which I was looking at obviously the flooding issues we have in the state. I want to thank you again for watching. I want to thank you again for reading the Post and Courier. Everybody, have a great day. Have a great week.
Post and Courier, being here in Columbia, it's our goal to really help you understand the issues. The most important thing to me as a journalist is getting at those stories that no one else is going to tell and looking out for the people in the community where I live. Investing in a local news subscription is what allows our reporters to spend the time telling the stories that will have the most impact on your life.